Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be speaking in person again at SREcon. Last talk was 4 years ago in Brooklyn, so it's good to get back in person after the height of the global pandemic. Today, I'll be presenting my talk on how JPMorgan Chase, our SRE team, has been an integral part of our movement into the public cloud. So hi, I'm Fred. I'm an executive director at JPMorgan Chase, working in the area of SRE observability. JPMorgan Chase is a financial services company, and executive director is basically their designation for principal engineer, something I learned when I joined exactly 6 months ago from a career in the tech industry, working for startups and public companies. I'm excited to speak about this work here today, but I do need to mention that the opinions and statements in this talk are my own and not those of the firm. Additionally, I've got a number of Creative Commons licensed images in this presentation. I've been writing code and breaking production since the dot-com boom, and have used most of the monitoring and observability tools out there, including probably a lot of the vendors here at the booth. I've got a special place in my heart and my keyboard for histograms, time series databases, service level objectives, which I've spoken about a lot, and also measuring latency. I've been lucky to work with and learn from some of the best minds in this industry, and this conference has been an integral part of making that happen. So let's dive in. So this is John Pierpoint Morgan Sr., who is the founder of what has ultimately led to become JPMorgan Chase & Company. To give a preface for this talk, I first want to present the landscape and scale of the firm so that I can accurately frame the problem of SREs catalyzing our move into the public cloud. When I initially joined the firm 6 months ago, we had a bit fewer than 57,000 technologists, which are composed of software engineers, data scientists, cloud specialists, and others. And that was a bit lower when I joined, but that was a number that was pretty big that I had a hard time wrapping my head around. Previously, I worked for Zendesk, which had close to 1,500 engineers, and that was the size I could navigate the org reasonably well and understand the relationships between different teams without a huge amount of effort. So stepping into a company with almost 30 times as many engineers was a big change for me. Over this movement into the cloud, the firm has increased its annual tech spend to $14 billion as part of our migration. And because we're a financial services firm, security is table stakes for us and baked into everything we do. Like some tech companies, there are in-house systems that have evolved over decades of work. And again, since we're primarily dealing with monetary transactions, reliability has to be a first-class feature. So last year, our CEO, Jamie Dimon, spoke about how we were increasing our spend to accelerate the move and increase our offering of digital products, calling those table stakes for customers. This has been an effort led from the top down, and one of our CIOs, Isa Lipkovitz, who came from Lyft and Google, has been spearheading that effort to transition our architecture and operations to the public cloud. So this is an effort that the entire firm has committed to making happen. And if you look at the landscape of financial services firms out there, digital offerings are at the forefront of where they are going, and cloud-centric architecture is how much of it is being implemented. And as part of this move to the cloud, since we're a financial services firm, there are regulations which require us to attest to how we secure our infrastructure and services. Security is woven into all parts of our infrastructure. And as I mentioned previously, I'm looking to help set the understanding of the complexity and scale of the engineering challenge we are facing so folks will understand the approaches we are taking and how we have implemented SRE as a catalyst in this transformation. So you're a financial services company for 224 years, and now you're going into the public cloud. As I mentioned, we've hired thousands of technologists, cybersecurity engineers, cloud computing specialists over the past few years. We're not transforming into a tech company, but we are looking to combine tech industry expertise with our financial services domain knowledge. Now, there's a lot of brilliant folks who work at the firm and have been there a long time, and when you get them together with people from the tech company who have been solving these problems at scale, it's really amazing to watch what happens. Currently, our technology moves over $10 trillion per day, and that's, while I can write that figure out, it was a bit hard for me to comprehend. And to put it into perspective, there's a company out there, a tech company, which has a market cap of 2.4 trillion. So 10 trillion is 4 times that market cap per day moving monetary transaction. That's a lot of apples. And so we created this SRE function at the firm a few years ago. And SREs have been working on not only roles directly related to reliability engineering, but also in moving services to the public cloud. And being an SRE over multiple companies, I've seen the discussion of what does an SRE do, result in multiple answers. So I think really the answer to this question is specific on your own company's needs and challenges. The Google SRE book told us how Google does SRE and gave some general guidelines and roles, but each company is different, and your version of SRE will likely be, not the same as the others. So JPMorgan Chase has four main lines of business: corporate investment bank, commercial bank, asset wealth management, and consumer and community banking. Now you think of each of these as a large structure with their own internal management frameworks. And each of these lines of business have a number of organizations within. For example, I'm in the corporate and investment bank line of business in the markets SR organization on the SRE team. And that line of business also has a dedicated SRE team who focuses on common line of business issues. There's almost 60,000 technologists across these four lines of business. So let me ask you, can you postulate for a minute on what would be your approach to gain alignment at that scale? You have hundreds of different teams using different tooling to support their specific business needs, each with their own goals in mind in terms of what the best approach is. Trying to get everyone aligned on perhaps tooling could be fairly difficult, where something more abstract like aligning on how we should define our SLOs could be more tractable. However, even within each line of business, there are different approaches on, say, how latency should be measured. A trading platform will have different requirements than, say, a post-processing platform, which handles reconciling trade activity. The trading platform focuses on speed and execution and volume, whereas the processing platform deals with transactions on the order of minutes, perhaps hours, and needs to ensure correctness as a top-level SLI. Now, speaking of platforms, let's take a look at what compute platforms we deal with. And the answer is kind of all of them. This is a broad view of the compute platforms we use across all the lines of business. Obviously we have mainframes, and those have been a traditional stay in the financial services industry, but the ones we have are a little more sophisticated than those using OS 360. And of course we're using the public cloud, and since we have a sizable on-prem presence, we use arrays of pizza boxes and racks to handle a portion of the compute load. We also have FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays, which are used in some special purpose areas such as trading platforms. And something I learned during the creation of this talk is that we also use quantum computing. And I looked through this set, the compute landscape spans almost everything, and that also includes laptops, phones, but not watches. If you go to chase.com, we've got client-side code serving that. There could be a Chase app on your phone, which we wrote code for. And so we write code in almost every single compute platform there is out there. And we also use a wide variety of programming languages. This is a non-exhaustive list. And as I continue to frame the landscape of this problem, you might be wondering why I'm talking about our compute platform and programming language landscape. Say, if we were just a Java-based shop running Spring Boot for all of our apps, the problem space becomes a lot smaller. You can centralize on one instrumentation library, one way of deploying code, one way of monitoring production. But each time you add in another compute platform, another programming language, you make the problem of alignment across the organization larger and more challenging. One question is, do we have a StatsD implementation for a common business-oriented language, also known as COBOL? I did a search in writing this talk to see if there's one out there on the net, and I couldn't find one. So, how would you handle that from an alignment perspective, since it's like our mainframe-based transactions are critical as part of workflows and something that we want to measure to integrate those into service-level objectives? Do you write a COBOL StatsD implementation from scratch? It actually sounds kind of fun, even though I haven't written COBOL. Maybe that'll be another talk. Now that we've framed the scale and the complexity of moving apps to the cloud at JPMC, let me dive into how we're approaching this challenge. Over the past few years, we've moved under 100 services in the cloud to over 500, and that number is probably a little out of date at the time of this talk. And this has largely been through the efforts of our SREs. We've combined the financial services domain expertise with cloud-native operational patterns, which brings up the question, what exactly is the SRE mindset I'm referring to here? The question of what actually do SREs do has been asked a lot. And while there are a lot of possible answers to that question, I think the next slide encapsulates what that really means at JPMorgan Chase. So SRE at JPMorgan Chase is software methodology applied to web operations to solve problems at scale. That's it. Though it may be simple to explain, it's not easy. as I spent some time going through the Cartesian product of people times products times platforms, you get a very large number there. But this also means that the problem set is well suited for an SRE mindset approach of applying software solutions to enable this movement to cloud at scale. So let's take a look at 2 specific challenges we've faced and how we've taken them on. Now, folks, who has seen this diagram? A lot of folks, yep. So everyone's familiar with it. It seems to grow in size and complexity every time I see it. The challenge here is mapping legacy on-prem systems to cloud-native landscape. This is, essentially your modern, evolution of the LAMP stack, which LAMP was Linux, Apache, Perl, Postgres, or was it Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP? So moving an app to the cloud is not a direct translation, a lift and shift, although it can be. But often you want to reframe your service in terms of modern offerings instead of just lifting and shifting it. As an SRE, you're probably familiar with most of the or some of the technologies here. There's so many of them. However, in a large organization where you've got applications running for decades, you might be an app engineer who knows the business requirements of your application inside and out, including security considerations, regulatory considerations, but you may not have had a lot of exposure to the cloud-native approach of doing things. Doing things well on-premise and doing them well in a cloud-native environment are really 2 architecturally distinct approaches, and they don't always map one-to-one. So let's take look at a couple of the specific issues. Issue number 1, resource management. With on-prem pizza boxes in a data center, you have largely a static resource capacity for serving user requests. If you get too much traffic, your app performance suffers, it hits saturation, and the service fails to be resilient and can experience a number of failure modes, that we understand a fair number of those. And there are some best practices out there to monitor resource stacks like this, like the Use dashboard developed by Brendan and Greg. And as needed, we can apply performance optimizations to squeeze more resources out of our fixed capacity systems, or we can scale those out. But provisioning hardware is a slow process. Now, if you're in a cloud-native approach, that means the same rules no longer apply. In auto-scaling environments, we're not concerned with saturating the underlying resources because those resources can essentially be considered infinite for most workloads. They aren't actually infinite, but they afford us the ability to assume so. Now our concerns primarily align with business resources. We optimize not just to improve the performance, but also to make our Opex, our operational costs, predictable. Instead of getting the same hosting bill every month, we might get an unpleasant surprise from FinOps letting us know that the recent code change incurred twice as much monthly cost. So we also have to look to monitor additional metrics like how much CPU spend is the app making. And any of those who saw Adrian Cockcroft's talk from Monitorama know that at some point in the future, we're going to need to monitor our carbon uses also as part of EU regulations. So life is more complicated running in the cloud than on-prem. Issue number 2 that we have to consider is measuring reliability. Now, this concern isn't specifically tied to the approach of on-prem versus cloud, but if we're going to do things the SRE way, it makes sense to go along with that. So this means a shift from, say, counting instances to using SLOs, service level objectives. And I've talked about those at length in the past. And to do this at JPMorgan Chase scale means we have to align organization-wide on what an SLO is and how it's measured, which can be relatively instrumentation agnostic, as there are many tooling options out there. And there's enough prior art around there on the subject of SLOs that this isn't a novel topic for us, and a lot of teams can really take that on and don't need a lot of hand-holding on this issue. Issue number 3, how do you manage infrastructure? Now, with this audience here, I know most of you consider this to be a solved problem. And I agree that, in most operating environments out there, you can use any number of domain-specific languages, to provision either fixed capacity or ephemeral-based resources. However, at our scale, as I mentioned, there's 4 lines of business with many sub-organizations and thousands of teams. So the part of the org providing the approved solution for the DSL that can actually implement this might be in a different LOB, and you need to establish those relationships and understand the processes around how you can make use of that DSL in a secure and regulated environment. So we looked at the technical challenges, but there's a challenge that needs to be solved to really make enabling these moves successful. Companies are not just made up of computers, but also people. And how you establish and manage those relationships across different teams, regions, different lines of business, and if you're gonna understand the relationships between other teams, are the challenges that you need to solve to do this effectively at scale. So remember how I talked about the Cartesian product of people, infrastructure, languages, and product domains? Being able to influence others without having direct authority is a skill needed as an SRE, not just at JPMC, but really any company where you have to accomplish cross-team goals. So how does one do that with 60,000 engineers? You start small. You have to scale down to be able to scale up. You have to develop an engagement model that works well with teams before you can syndicate it and use software to expand that out. And you also have to establish a reputation that you know what you're doing, and also to be able to show what good looks like. When you can do that with a few teams, others will start to take notice and want to participate, and we've seen this happen. And to do this, you have to establish relationships and build trust with those teams that are critical parts of the company for a long time. You're the SRE. You're the expert in cloud technology and using software approaches in operations. Trust is a huge currency. Does anyone know what this diagram is? Yeah, Feynman diagram. So an electron and a positron come together, produce a photon, which produces a anti-quark pair, and spins off a gluon, I believe. I put this diagram up there to illustrate how important these small one-on-one reactions are to making success at scale. You should engage with teams on a one-to-one basis initially and meet them on their domain. And what does that mean? Well, for one team I was working with, they had their sprint planning meetings at 3 p.m. Glasgow time, and I live in San Francisco, which means I would get up at 5:30 in the morning to join their sprint planning meetings. I would listen to their concerns about migrating apps to the cloud, and then would go do the research on things they asked about, and come back with answers again at 5:30 in the morning. And they might have thought I was a little bit nuts at first, but really what I was doing was building trust. And I was putting some skin in the game there. And as our SREs, we have to get skin in the game to work with these teams and be able to feel their pain. We want to know that we're not just paying them lip service. And this brings us to issue number 2. You're an SRE. You have the skills that others don't. You can write code and deploy it to production and scale out. You may not have the deep product knowledge or security knowledge or regulatory knowledge that an app team does, but you have those wings to get into the cloud. And as I mentioned previously, you want to lead with empathy, understand the concerns they have, feel their pain, and commit to putting effort into those. And once you've established that trust and felt their pain, you have to do the heavy lifting. Trying to convince them, well, just go write this Terraform code, doesn't work. Initially, you have to go and do it for them because you're the one who's been through that. You could set up apps so that you take all that on, and when you get paged, you're the one responsible, and you take that pain so that you show them that you're leading from the front. And I've been through this in different forms at previous companies. Embracing a new approach always takes someone breaking ground, and you're the one who needs to do that. So, challenges at scale. You've probably all heard about Dunbar's number. Most of us can maintain 150 relationships. How do you reach out to 60,000 engineers with that? So really, you have to establish relationships with different teams to essentially hack Dunbar's number and scale out. And this also applies to your own SRE team. I'm not going to bang my head against some DSL code if I need to get something done. I'm just going to go ask another expert on my team. And similarly, they can ask me if they've got an observability question. And that way, if I've got a team of 5 members, now my reach in terms of Dunbar's number has gone out to 750. So that's another approach. And we're almost through this, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about the financial services industry. Trust and reliability is our currency, and if anyone has been paying attention to current events over the past few weeks, that point should impress itself upon you. So we have a few unique challenges. We have fixed trading windows. Systems have to run reliably during those windows without compromises. The flip side there is that we have periods outside those windows where reliability work can be prioritized. We're not a web store that has to be open 24/7. But when it does have to open, it absolutely has to. And the cost of downtime can be measured directly in dollars. So like the tech industry, we have some white swan events that occur at regular intervals, meetings of the Fed, that sort of thing. And we also have black swan events, geopolitical events, global pandemics, and so forth. It's important that we put our customers' trust first and make our reliability as good as it can possibly be. And that's a wrap. Thank you.